Welcome to the new normal. No, this is not an episode of Black Mirror. This is in fact how we are now living our lives, interacting with people through a screen and having conversations with people entirely digitally. It's weird, right? It's really weird. I mean, the good news is that given this is a podcast and this is very much how we'd interacted up until now, I mean, there's not much different there, but you are liable to get a little bit more crazy than usual today. So enjoy. Sorry about that. Hello there pickles and welcome to episode 42 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and RAVELRY as dunderknit. I'm a knitter living here in London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a huge hello and welcome to you. I do like to give a very quick word of warning up front just to let you know that this is a swearing friendly podcast and therefore the language, it can get a little colourful. If that's not to your taste, or indeed if there are tiny and sensitive ears knocking about in the room where you are, this may not be the podcast for you. But that being said, if you're entirely fine with the swears, or indeed if you're coming back here after a little bit of a hiatus, admittedly, but you are an otherwise regular viewer, a massive hello and welcome to you. I really do hope you're all well. Yes, as I hinted there, it has been a little bit longer than usual, only an extra week in terms of publishing a podcast schedule, but almost a month, over a month now since I last recorded, and that does sound a little bit like I'm saying since my last confession. Not entirely inaccurate. It's fair to say the world has changed fairly drastically in that space of time. We've gone from being, you know, kind of fairly footloose and fancy free as things go to on pretty serious lockdown the world over. Obviously, with the ongoing pandemic around coronavirus, there's a huge amount of change that's happened in all of our communities over the last few weeks. And it feels baffling in some ways just to say weeks, because it's that weird passage of time now where it feels as though it's been a very long stretch of time and yet no time at all since things really started to fucking escalate. Thank you so much. I don't want to go any further before I say thank you so much for everybody, to everybody for your concern reaching out after both the previous podcasts. I mentioned when I filmed last about 5 weeks ago that I was going to be heading off to the west coast of the US with my mum for a much needed and long awaited holiday. Yeah, so a very quick recap on that. Obviously, I am back, I am safe, I am healthy, and I'm incredibly grateful for all of those things. My mum is likewise back and is likewise safe and healthy and isolating in her own home a little bit further west of here. We're in regular contact, she is absolutely fine. But yeah, so we were due to fly out on Saturday the 14th of March. We were due to fly over to San Francisco, and at that point in time the general guidance and health regulations that were being presented and published by the British government and indeed the world over were suggesting there were some restrictions that were in place, but for the most part it was all still pretty open. And so we took the opportunity to fly with the intention of saying, well, you know, we're going to be in parks for the most part, big national parks, and so we're going to be fairly separate from sort of large cities. We're not going to spend too much time there. We figured we'd be pretty safe as part of that. Now, as you're probably aware, things escalated pretty darn quickly, and so actually for us, while we were in the air, the regulations changed, the guidance changed, and while we were able to land in San Francisco without any problems at all, from that perspective we were subject to quite a bit of screening, to some form filling out, and indeed to a sort of health check upon arrival. Things changed fairly quickly. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time going into it. Suffice to say that after a few days there, partly as hotels that we booked for later on in the journey started to be cancelled, and partly due to the fact that some of the parks when we were out there were actively closing their facilities, their visitor facilities, it really reached the point for us fairly swiftly when we realised this wasn't going to go entirely as planned and we should probably make a bit of a swift exit. That wasn't entirely straightforward. We did end up having to take a connecting flight through from San Jose to Dallas. I have now been to Texas. I'm not really sure it counts given I was between two terminals in the airport and it was fairly quiet. But we came back, we got back very safe, very sound later on that same week. So we arrived home on the Thursday, and yeah, I spent a couple of days laying low before then starting back at work, albeit from an social distancing and working from home capacity the following week. So yeah, it was not entirely the holiday that we had planned, but the good news is we got back entirely safe. Now, just to touch a little bit more broadly on the pandemic itself, obviously, it goes almost without saying that I hope every single one of you is safe, sound, healthy, and that your loved ones are likewise. This is a very, very weird time, and I think the extent to which this is impacting us socially, culturally, mentally, is yet to be fully kind of established and appreciated. I know that for some people, it's a varying degree of kind of impact, if you like. There are absolutely people and friends of mine out there who work from home full-time and are either on their own or have very small family support groups, and for them in the day-to-day there's not a huge amount that's changed, but obviously the social circumstances, the climate, the conversations that are happening around this are vastly different. And similarly, there are friends of mine who are running small businesses that are relying on or are part of the services industry. And that has certainly in the UK been almost entirely decimated by this. Businesses are no longer able to trade, people are being laid off in terms of staffing, and I think it'll be a long time before we're able to come to terms with what this means sort of globally, financially, and individually, economically as well. Obviously, I don't have any answers. That's not what you come here for. If I did have answers, I might set my ambitions slightly loftier than a knitting podcast, but as it stands, yeah, no, don't have any of those. Sorry about that. But I guess the main thing is, look, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about it. I know it's a stressful and emotive subject for so many of us. I know that many of us are probably looking to knitting podcasts to try and get a little bit of light relief from all of that. But it just goes to say, look, wherever you are, however you're impacted, I really, really do hope you're doing okay. Now is a great time for us to really rely on some of the bonds that knitting brings, and the fact that we get to take part in this digital community that is almost entirely founded on internet connections and social connections and Ravelry connections. I'm lucky enough to be able to have a really strong foundation of knitting friends across the globe. We don't get to see each other in person that often, if indeed at all, but this is a great time for us to be able to reach out and check in. If you're able to do the same, please do so. If you don't have knitting friends at the moment, or you're still trying to build up your network, please do feel free to either use the Knitting Vicariously podcast group in Ravelry, which is a wonderful source of just, frankly, brilliant people. And I know that I'm blowing smoke up your own asses by saying that. I have no qualms about this. But also use things like Instagram. I think this is a great time for folk to be reaching out and making those connections and strengthening them that already exist. So a little bit more later on about how I'm looking for us to do that a little bit more. But in the meantime, as I say, hope you're all well, hope you're staying healthy, and yeah, if I can help and in any way take your mind off things by not continuing to talk about this too much more, I will endeavour very much to do so. So yes, we are back to our regular podcast format, upfront gubbins notwithstanding, and I do have a few things to share with you this week. Now, first things first, I do just want to mention that as ever, everything we talk about will be explained a little bit more in detail in the show notes immediately below this video. You're also going to be able to find rather more extended show notes over on Ravelry in the aforementioned Knitting Vicariously podcast group. If you're not already a member over there, I urge you to head on over and join in some of the conversations. One, because we have a truly magnificent moderator who is the wonderful Yelena, who remembers to open threads on a monthly basis when it clearly passes me by entirely. Thank you, Yelena. You are an absolute wonder and I love you very dearly. But aside from Yelena, there are many other reasons to head to the podcast group. There are some great discussions around everything from what it is that you're working on right now to some of the CALs that we've had previously, and indeed just to the odd question or I guess kind of slightly more specific discussion about any number of things. So again, if you're looking for some way of picking up with and engaging with people, I definitely recommend you take a look over there. You will also be able to find a little bit more show notes, good Englishing excellent work, much good speak. Good lord. Can you tell that a lot of my communication's been like kind of limited to just typing on a keyboard for the last few weeks? I'm having more conference calls than I've ever had with anybody in my life, and that involves speaking into a webcam. It's a lot. I'm wording English. Anyway, you can find additional show notes over on Instagram with the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account. There I will link to all of the relevant makers and any hashtags, so you're able to internet stalk them a little bit more efficiently. And so as we move into our regular segments, the very first of these is the What I'm Wearing segment. And now, the clear-eyed amongst you may have recognised that I don't seem to be wearing any knitwear, and you are not entirely wrong. However, there is a tiny bit of knitwear related goodness about my person. Now, I'm not wearing proper knitwear because it's currently the Easter weekend, the bank holiday weekend here in the UK, and that means, as we are of course all stuck inside, there is the most glorious sunshine and weather imaginable. It is currently around about 26 degrees Celsius, I believe, which I want to say is maybe high 70s Fahrenheit. People keep telling me how to convert the two and it always falls out of my head. So yeah, I'm going to make a wild stab at that. But that means that of course it is currently t-shirt weather here where I live. But you may have noticed, however, a little bit of knitwear related goodness about my person. This here is a necklace by the wonderful maker who is Malika. I have mentioned her on multiple occasions. Soraya is the incredible talent behind the Malika brand, and I am happy to say that when I popped over to Unravel back in February, I sat and stood and spoke to her briefly at her stand, and she mentioned that she was taking orders for bespoke items. I leapt at the chance for this. It'd been sort of in the back of my brain as an idea for a while up until now, and so I decided to absolutely take the plunge, and this pendant is her incredible creation. It's actually part of a set. I have the earrings here. I would have worn them, but I wanted to be able to show you them without showing you my giant face, as is usually the way that these things work. So I will hold these up to the camera so you're able to see them and talk about them in a little bit more detail. So these beauties here are my earrings to match the pendant itself. These are her hexadrop earrings, and as you may be able to see, there are some beautiful little gems in the center here, so some sort of smoky grey crystals. Let's see if I can pop my finger behind you, might be able to see those a little bit more clearly. So yes, there are these smoky grey crystals in the centre with the yarn itself. I believe it's crocheted around the outside. Now, the yarn is the part that is bespoke in all of this. So what you're able to do with Soraya's fantastic designs is you're able to give her a little scrap of your yarn that you would like her to use, and she will use that as part of your bespoke order. So these are hook earrings. They've got a little kind of safety clasp on the back, a little rubber stopper that stops them from obviously falling off. And I love them very, very much. So the yarn that's used here, I don't know if you'll recognise it. I mean, obviously, it's what I call gold. I know not everyone calls this gold. I know some people call this brown. And Max and Amy, I am absolutely looking at you when I say that. But you would be wrong, because at the very least, it's bronze, if not indeed just gold. So shush. But yeah, so this is yarn I took along from, it's leftover yarn from my my Zweig pullover that I knit roughly this time last year at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival. It is Hey Sister Yarn Co. in the colourway Drizzle. It's the Geronimo sock base, which is their 80/20 sock base. Hey Sister Yarn Co. are sadly no longer trading, but this colourway in particular, for all that it looks kind of fairly semi-solid and fairly, you know, kind of standard, nothing too remarkable, compared to some of these super bright and punchy variegated yarns that many of Soraya's designs feature, and they are beautiful. For me personally, I knew this is something I'm probably going to get a fairly significant amount of wear from, both in terms of the earrings and the necklace itself. The necklace is so beautiful. I am going to need to stand up so I can do it justice. So 1 second. Here we go. I couldn't let you go without the standard boob shot for the podcast, but in amongst all this, you should be able to see this incredibly beautiful glittery wonder that is this drop necklace, and it is beautiful. So again, the wire here in the center has been crocheted. It's fabulous. I have the smoky grey crystals to match the center of those hexadrop earrings all around the outside, and then around the rim is the Hey Sister Yarn Co yarn again that's been crocheted to create this beautiful accent around the edges. And it's on this beautiful gold chain. The gold in the centre, the gold on the outside was Soraya's idea. When we were talking it through, she has a number of different combinations, and this was the one that we picked out, and I'm just over the moon with it. So yes, I could not urge you enough. If this is something that you would like to consider, you want to look at bespoke design, I would totally recommend that you pop over to Malika's website and take a look at it yourself. So there you have it. That is what I am wearing this week. Honestly, I love this so much. I squealed with delight when I opened this. I'm so pleased with it. So yes, definitely worth taking a look. In the meantime though, moving on to knitting itself, I have a finished object to share, and I have it to share. I do not have it to hand, and that is because these have already been finished, these have already been gifted, and the fact that it's plural is some indication as to what we're talking about here. Now, before you get too concerned in all of this, it's a very strange time. People are, you know, kind of dealing with this in whatever way that they can right now. For me, a lot of time spent working from home is not unusual. I've done it before in previous jobs, certainly not to this extent. But for me, one of the sort of things that's kind of causing underlying stress at the moment is the fact that within my job, which is still kind of safe and ongoing at the moment, for which I'm incredibly grateful, we are doing an awful lot of replanning. Obviously, the plans that we had in place for the rest of this year are now firmly out of the window. And so there's a huge amount of kind of rethinking what we're going to be doing for the rest of the year going on. Replanning, particularly with very limited context, is not my favourite activity. I am definitely someone who deals a little bit more happily in the realities of things. And so it's fair to say that work-wise I've been a little bit more kind of stressed, and as is fairly probably imaginable under these current conditions. And so what I've taken to doing is a huge amount of time that's been spent on conference calls is just gently sort of knitting away just underneath the camera. So much like this, you might not be able to see what I'm doing, but underneath it all I have a little kind of feat of productivity going on there, just to help me kind of again focus and stay in the moment, but also at the same time relieve some of the jitters. Turns out when you do that, you really do ratchet through a pair of socks. I know. So I've knit socks. I've knit a pair of socks fairly quickly, I hasten to add. I am going to put the picture of them up here on the screen for you to see. These are what I am calling my exposed tits in isolation sock, the reason for which will become clear momentarily. These socks are knit 64 stitches on a 2.25mm needle, which is a US size 1. The reason I say that is because there's no one particular pattern with this. It's almost a kind of recipe, if you like. I did use 2x2 rib up at the top. I think I knit maybe about 12 rows of that, and then went into stockinette for the leg. I knit all my socks top down. I always have done. I find that I prefer it that way because reasons. And I knit it with a Fishlet's Kiss heel. Now the contrast colours in all of this are Bear in Sheep's Clothing Sturdy Sock. It's in a really dark grey colourway. I don't know the colourway name off the top of my head. I'm guessing it's something like Smoke or Charcoal, something very kind of moody and it's such a good contrast colour. Whereas the main colourway for the socks is by the wonderful Haverland, and it is her If I Want Exposure, I Will Get My Tits Out colourway, the graffiti overlay version. This was part of the Countess Ablaze initiative, I believe it was last year, potentially the year before, which was part of a broad indie dyer collaboration where Countess Ablaze asked them to go away and create colourways based on or inspired by a colourway that she had dyed herself, and it was to kind of use inspiration, take inspiration from the colours that she'd used, but to be interpreted in any way by any different indie dyer and their preferred style. So what you found is that while the colourways were kind of vaguely homogenous, they had similar elements to them, depending on that yarn dyer's style, they took a completely different spin. It was an incredible initiative. There's probably an Instagram hashtag that you can take a look at for everything that was related to it. I suspect it was. If I want exposure, I'll get my tits out. And so as such, this was a yarn that I fell in love with over on Instagram when I saw it and purchased it. Finally got round to knitting it up, and as you can see, the self-striping is wonderful. I love this so much. It turned out that as I was knitting it, I wasn't really I didn't have my heart set on owning these socks. It was more just, this was definitely a process knit. This was I need to adjust. It's fair to say that maybe one of the socks was knit in rage. I have warned the recipient that if one is slightly tighter than the other, that may be why. Because the second sock was knit once I had agreed that these were going to be a gift for someone else. Essentially what happened was, while I was knitting it, someone said, look, these are beautiful, but actually they look really like they would work well for this person. I completely agreed, and so decided to knit those for that person, and they've since been gifted, and thankfully I think the recipient is very happy with them. So very, very pleased about that. But yes, it does mean that I do not have them to hand to be able to show you. They are so much fun though, and I really enjoyed knitting them, and they will not be the last socks that I show you today. Yes, don't know how I feel about that. We'll see how we go. So that is the FO that I had to show you this week. In terms of works in progress, yeah, there's been a fair bit of knitting going on. I mean, obviously it's been the best part of 5 weeks since I last podcasted properly, so you'd imagine that there would be a fair bit cracking on, but obviously with a little bit more downtime, a little bit less time spent commuting, a little bit more time spent really kind of sitting at home in the evenings, I have been able to get a few bits done. So the first whip to show you this time around is my sorrel pullover. This is a pattern by Wool and Pine that is Dank Fibre and Abby's Knits, and it's such a beautiful pattern. I will put it over here just to remind you, but you know this very well by now, don't you? And so this is just the most beautiful pullover. It's been designed to have fingering weight yarn, single ply yarn and mohair held together. You have the option of doing it with a fade should you so wish. I have chosen to do just that, and this is where I'm at. So you will be able to see that from last time on, I have finished off the yoke. I've also knit a little bit more. I have separated the sleeves and I'm now on the body of the sweater. I was just faffing about with it there because I was turning it inside out from the sleeves downwards. This is knit in the round inside out because the surface of the sweater, as you may be able to see, is reverse stockinette. But rather than being complete masochists, what they have you do is they have you knit it inside out, so you're knitting all the stitches as opposed to purling them, which is wonderful. But you might be able to see, this is really, really problematic to try and show you. I have faded in from the first colour to the second, and then I've just finished fading in the third down here. So what we have up here at the top is, if I can show you a little bit more closely, there we go. So you can see at the top here, it is a little bit more extreme in its colour. There are quite a few pops of colour in there. The top colour that we have here is Ushatita. It is the, I believe it's the Coral Reef colourway. And then as we go a little bit further down, it blends into one that is still sort of fairly full of pops of colour, but with a little bit more sort of yellow gold as an undertone. That is again Ushatita, but this time in the Wild Honey colour. And then towards the bottom, which you may just be able to see there, I'm fading into Wool and Vine Yarns on her Nouveau base, and this is her Pumpkin Kombucha colourway. I will show you just a couple of those. I don't have all three of them to hand, unfortunately. I do, however, have both the pumpkin kombucha and the wild honey colorways, so I will show you those two side by side. We go. You can see here that I've got a fair bit of the wild honey left over. You can also see that it's got these beautiful sort of lighter and darker gold highlights, whereas the pumpkin kombucha is a little bit more, I would say, sort of monochromatic. There's a bit less of the variegation and the different tonal pops, but it's also got a really nice sort of set of golden hues to it, and so I'm enjoying working with these both tremendously. All of these are being held together with this stunning mohair. This is Stranded Dye Works mohair silk in the caramel colorway. Amy's colorways are beautiful at the best of times, but this, I love it very much. I don't know what that noise is that I just made. We're gonna just gloss over that. It's so beautiful. It looks fairly solid from here, but there is just some gentle variegation to it. There's the occasional bit of speckling. Don't know how, there you are, that's coming up a little bit there. It's just a joy to knit with. So yeah, I've been loving working with that. I do have one more colour that I will be fading into. It is this. You can see again, it's a bit moodier and darker still alongside the pumpkin kombucha. This is Lamb Strings yarn in their Sadie Singles base, and this is the Rooibos colourway, and again, moody and glorious, and I'm very much looking forward to getting to that. So yeah, fair bit that's been going on here. So dear, yeah, this is really just kind of stockinette now. It is knitting in the round. It is getting there. As I say, I'm not long through having just gone into the pure third colour and finished alternating as part of the fade. So I will do a few more inches of that, and then we'll start alternating in that last Rooibos colour, and we should be pretty much good to go. In terms of sizing, I'm pretty sure I'm knitting the size 44, 45, there or thereabouts, which is pretty much bang on from my bust measurement. I'm expecting to have very, very minimal ease around the bust, not least because I'm sitting at home at the moment and not doing quite as much of my regular exercise as I might otherwise do. But to be perfectly honest, there's none of us giving ourselves a hard time about that right now, right? Because bloody hellfire, there's a fucking pandemic on. I mean, really, there are bigger things to worry about than the size of my arse. Just. Sorry, that was, yeah, anyway, but yes, I'm very, very much enjoying working on this right now. It's one of the things getting my attention at the moment. I think what I'm finding just now is it's quite nice to be sort of picking things up and putting things down. Again, I might have mentioned this actually in the Q&A that I did last time round. It's quite nice to have, at a time when everything is just going to shit, it's quite nice to have slightly more kind of fixed, or I hesitate to say control because that comes with different overtones, but to take a bit more ownership of something that is entirely within your gift to manage. So the knitting that we are doing right now, it's really nice to be able to go, right, I'm going to be very structured about this and I'm going to choose how to do these things because that is something that is entirely within my own gift to manage. And I definitely found myself doing that a little bit more than usual this month. So yes, enjoying working on my sorrel. In terms of needles, as always, I'm using my Chowgoos. I love these needles. I'm also dropping a stitch, which is fine. We're just going to pick you up and sort you out a little bit later on. But yes, using my Chowgoo needles, these are 3.75 millimeters, which is a US size 5. So yeah, this is my sorrel. So next up, I was pondering last time round what I was going to be taking away with me as holiday knitting. In the previous episode, I spoke a little bit about what I might choose to take with me. I wanted something that was a sizable endeavour, but at the same time, not going to be too much to lug around. I pondered and I did my traditional, you know, kind of, I don't really overthink about things that I'm going to take away on holiday, but you know, this was definitely the era in which I poured a lot of my kind of pre-holiday, stress is a strong word, preparation. I'm probably not alone when I say that holiday knitting is definitely something that requires a degree of attention and thought that goes into it. I may have been mocked slightly on quite how much thought was going into it, but you know, it meant that I was able to come up with the right decision after potentially a few false starts along the way. Those of you who've watched for a little while may remember I cast on, in terms of an sort of informal knit along with my mum actually, I cast on the Sova Bellin sweater. I'll put a picture up here early on. I forget if it was this year or last year, sometime, maybe sort of late last year perhaps. My mum was knitting this for herself, and so we were doing a little bit of an informal knit along. I started working on it and just thought, this isn't quite for me. Not because of anything to do with the pattern itself, but more to do with the fit of the garment, what it was, and just the sort of raglan sleeves, the nature of it. I wasn't really feeling the pattern. I was, however, definitely feeling the yarn that I was working it up in. I was knitting it with some stash yarn that has been living just right down here, and it was some limited edition super soft DK from Madeline Tosh. This is back many years ago now, when I used to make a fair few orders from the Madeline Tosh web store. Now, this was the most beautiful deep green. I very much fell in love with the colourway, and it had been sitting there in my projects for a while, just waiting to be ripped out so that I could start it over and have a bit of a think about what it was to become. Thought about this for a little bit and then thought, oh, now, those of you who watched the last episode may remember I was wearing my Morning in Engelberg sweater, and I mentioned in passing I'd quite like another one of these. Spoiler alert, that is entirely where my head went to. This is going to be a pain in the arse to show you because of where I have finished the round, but I have for you here a work in progress Morning in Engelberg sweater. Yes, indeed. This is the beautiful Viridian green, which is a fat, oh hello, sorry, the camera's just caught up and is now slightly overexposing, but probably doing justice to this beautiful colour. This is just the most beautiful kind of emerald bottle green colourway, and I love it very, very much. You can see the cable pattern for Morning in Engelberg starting to emerge. I will put the pattern picture up here on the side. It is a pattern, gosh, I've gone full goth white, haven't I? It's a pattern by Nadia Cretan-Lachen, and it's really, really lovely. I highly recommend this pattern. I've already knit one version of it, as you will have seen last time round, in gold, because of course, and I decided that what I really needed was a second one. However, I have made one fairly significant modification. My only complaint about the current version I have, the gold version of the sweater, is the fact the neckline is a little bit on the wide side for me. It does mean that I'm limited in terms of the tops that I like to wear underneath it, and indeed in terms of just the fit just feels a little bit on the loose side. So what I took the time to do this time round is modify that neckline. I cast on the same number of stitches as before, but I actually cast on with a cable cast on, and then decided I was going to knit it to double the height, folded it over, and then it's not so much a 3-needle bind off as it is really just once you get to the bottom you knit through both the following row and your cast on edge at the same time. So you're knitting those two together and creating this folded over neckline, folded collar, which is a look that I have on a number of different sweaters, and I absolutely adore the look and fit of this, partly because it gives a really beautiful finished edge. There you go, there's a bit of colour porn for you. It's nice, isn't it? And partly because it just means it fits and sits really well up and around my neckline. Now, this will probably still be fairly open, but it's not going to sit kind of off here on my shoulders in the way that it has done before. The fact is as well, this sweater is knit at quite a loose gauge. It's DK weight yarn, but it's knit on 5mm needles, which is a US size 8. And so for all that you can't, you know, sort of see through, you can a little bit maybe, it means that it's quite drapey, particularly once it's been blocked, and so I'm not expecting it to sort of bunch or sit weirdly up here. We'll see how we go, but I reckon it should be fine. So really, really loving how this is knitting up. As you can see, it is a raglan style sweater with this garter panel on the front and this really beautiful chunky old cable. Similarly on the back, it is also the garter panel here, although the sleeves themselves are still knit in stockinette. You can see that I've just bound off or separated the sleeves, and I'm now onto the body of the sweater. And yeah, again, this is going to be some great TV knitting over the next few weeks. So, oh, I'm loving working on this so much. I'm knitting the same size as before. I'm knitting the size 44-inch bust because I know that size fits really nicely on me with the previous version of the sweater that I have. Again, this blocks out to be lovely and drapey, so it sits and flows really nicely, and I'm expecting this to be pretty darn similar. So yeah, as I mentioned, I am knitting this from Stash Yarn. I'm knitting this in Madeleine Tosh Super Soft DK in the Viridian colour. I will hold it up for you to see. There you go. Isn't it beautiful? It's just this kind of amazing, slightly glazed green, and it is one of my absolute favourites. I love it very much. I've talked about my feelings for Madeleine Tosh in the past. I'll confess I'm not totally sure where I stand on it at the moment. They've obviously gone through some fairly significant change in the last year. From being an independent company, they've since been bought by Jimmy Bean's Yarns, and so there's obviously been a fairly significant degree of change that's gone through on the company side, not at least in management. I haven't really sort of looked at them much since then. I know that they are certainly making some efforts in the space of kind of greater representation, and in particularly supporting BIPOC communities as such. I haven't looked into a huge amount of detail. I haven't been buying much of their yarn over the last few years anyway. But yeah, as yet, I don't have an opinion about it, and I just mention that because I usually do get asked it. Not sure how I feel about it right now. I'll come back to you once I know more. But in the meantime, I am definitely using the opportunity right now to use a little bit more of my stash yarn that I've built up over a fair bit of time. And in the rush to get ready for holiday, this was definitely one yarn that I wanted to make the most of using. So delighted with how this is coming out so far, and we'll hopefully show you some more progress on that soon. Now, I hinted at this a little bit earlier on, but the last work in progress I have to share with you this time round is another sock. Yes, because I do find at the moment that when I'm sitting on conference calls, it is quite nice and comforting just to have something that I can pick up and work on if I need to. I am not someone that would ever knit at work. I know there are plenty of people that do. I absolutely believe this is a personal choice, so please don't think for 1 second that I am in any way judging you or what you choose to do. You are so very entitled to doing whatever the fuck you like, and I promise you that I have zero personal judgment or opinions on the matter, and even if I did, they wouldn't affect you, so there we are. But what I would say is that just the environment that I work in, the teams that I work in, for all that they know that I'm a knitter, they definitely know that I'm a knitter. It's just not an environment where I would sit and knit at any point during my workday. That being said, getting to work from home changes things a little bit. So what I've found is that there's quite a few calls that I'm on at the moment that are check-ins, or that are perhaps a little bit more staggered in terms of areas where I'm inputting versus things where I'm just kind of listening and receiving information. And so as such, I'm finding it quite nice and quite therapeutic to have something just underneath the screen that I can work away on. And it's not because I want to be distracted, it's not because I'm in any way bored. I actually just find it's quite useful to focus my attention on the screen. It's very different. I don't know if anyone else who works a lot with kind of collaboration tools and conference calls is finding this, but it's very different sitting in a meeting room, being surrounded by people and kind of feeling the energy that's in there and being able to use that as a gauge, from watching kind of split screens with a few different people talking, sometimes with or without video. And it's a very different way of working and meeting with people. It's quite difficult to read the room. It's quite difficult to kind of get a full picture of what's being, I guess, brought to the table, if you want to call it that. And what I've found is that it's quite useful to have something here, again, not as a distraction, more just as something that helps me, weirdly kind of helps me focus more. I suspect there's probably people out there who know exactly what I'm talking about. Similarly, I suspect there are people out there who have no fucking clue what I'm talking about. Hoping there's more of the former and less of the latter. But even if you are in the latter group, trust me when I say it's quite nice just to have something there. And so I have been working on some more socks. I cast these on the other day. I haven't got very far with them just yet, but here we have it. I am actually attempting to knit a patterned sock, a reasonably simply patterned sock, but a patterned sock nevertheless. So let me hold it up to show you here. This is the very beginning of of a blueberry waffle sock. This is a free pattern that's been doing the rounds on Ravelry for a good few years now. It's fairly simple and straightforward. It is a series of rib rows with a series of knit rows in there as well, just to give this kind of slightly raised and intermittently sort of broken rib texture that you have. It is really nice. It's very simple to be able to pick up and read your knitting, and as such makes for a great kind of stretchy and slightly more interesting sock pattern. You will see I am knitting it on my little 9-inch circular needles. I find these work really well for my particular style of knitting. I tend to, so I'll wrap the yarn, I'm an English style knitter, I'll wrap the yarn there, I'll tension it over this finger here, and then I knit pretty much exclusively with my fingertips. So just to give you a little indication as to what that looks like when I'm going round and round. Here you have it. So yes, this works quite well for me. I appreciate not everybody can work with 9-inch circulars. If you're a Magic Loop fan, that's great. If you're a DPN fan, even better. If you knit on 2 circulars, knock yourself out. It just so happens that these work really nicely for me, and I'm able to whiz round in circles without worrying too much about needles and faff and that good stuff. So yes, the yarn that I'm using is actually some leftovers. This was in my kind of scrappy drawer. It is some old yarn from Spun Right Round. This is her 80/20 sock yarn base, or superwash sock base in, here we are, in the Secret Handshake colourway. It's this kind of beautiful, I want to say sort of lavender purple base with speckles of all sorts, from pinks to greens to yellows to beautiful kind of purpley reds in there as well. It's a really, really lovely colourway. I actually used this in my, oh crumbs, excuse me shawl. I think it's a Stephen West pattern. It might be the only Stephen West pattern I've actually knit, which is a brioche shawl. It's really, really lovely, big and squishy and beautiful, and this was one of the contrast colours that I used in that shawl. And yeah, as I say, was in my stash, was rummaging around for something, so I didn't have to cake it up and faff about, and this is pretty much bang on the yarn that I need. Hopefully, we'll see. I don't think I'm going to run out. Really hope I'm not going to run out, but we'll see how I get on with this. In terms of needles, again, 2.25mm needles, US size 1, 64 stitches. I think with this one I'm actually going to knit a regular heel and gusset, a heel flap and gusset. That's partly driven by the fact that I have a previous pair of blueberry waffle socks, which I will grab for you actually. One second. Here we have it. These are the pair that I knit previously. They are just fiery and bright and delicious. These are knit using Lush sock yarn in the Glam Slam colourway, which is a beautiful like Stellina sock base with this ridiculously wonderful coral colour. Lush Knits is my wonderful friend Megan. She is not currently dyeing at the moment, so apologies for showing you something that is wonderful but not currently available. That being said, oh, Megan, think about it. I'm just saying. Just saying. But yeah, you can see here that these have a heel flap and gusset. I will show you them here because clearly having sock blockers would be far too useful at this point in time. So you have a twisted stitch heel flap here, and then as you can see there is a little bit of cheeky gusset action going on. I'm doing a really terrible job of being able to show you these. There you have it. So I was wearing these the other day, which is why they're a little bit fluffy. Sorry about that. Didn't wash them yet. But I recognised kind of how comfortable this heel flap was on my foot. And for all that it's really simple to knit the Fishlips Kiss heel, it is my go-to. I know how to do it. I can sort of memorise how to do it and just crack into it. Heel flap is a little bit more involved. You need to think about what you're doing. You need to stop and go back and forth. It's more of a kind of sit down and do thing. But it fits really well. So yeah, gonna suck it up, gonna do the heel flap, might do that one lunchtime and just break it out, go and sit in the garden for a bit, treat myself and work through that. But yes, these are the socks that I'm looking to emulate with that yarn, and hopefully, because you know 26 degrees is totally the weather for woolly socks. Definitely. Sure. And that's it for my knitting this time round. I do have a little bit of stash enhancement to show you. While I was over in the US, I had no intention of purchasing yarn whatsoever. But it so happened that on the first full day that we were in San Francisco, which was the only day we were spending in a big city, it was incredibly quiet. The whole place, it wasn't on lockdown at this point. It was still sort of a little bit early on, but certainly there were fewer people on the streets than I've ever seen when I've been there in the past. We went for a bit of a wander around the Mission and Castro districts, partly to see some of the street art, some of the graffiti, and partly just to visit a couple of different kind of coffee shops, grab some breakfast. And those of you who are familiar with San Francisco may well know that in the heart of that district you will find Imagine-It. And Imagine-It is a beautiful store. It was right in the midst of some really stunning kind of hills within those fabulous streets of San Francisco. And I say we stumbled upon it. I may have recognised where it was and gently steered us in that direction, but you know, that's semantics as far as I'm concerned. So yes, we popped into the store and had a little bit of a look around. Now, it's fair to say that there were sort of early on social distancing measures going on. They were doing a great job in that store of making sure that sort of people weren't touching the yarn overly. People were making sure that the door was open and people were able to kind of get in and out without worrying about kind of physically interacting too much with people. There was some good distancing going on. I haven't been into a huge number of stores since this started, obviously, but while they were still open, they were doing a great job of it, so absolute kudos to them. But while we were in there, Mum and I were both a little bit taken with one particular yarn. It was sitting in a shelf with a few other colourways, but it was fair to say this really did have to be mine. I have not got any by way of kind of ombre yarn outside of one skein that I picked up last year at Rhinebeck, but this is the most beautiful little bullseye skein of apple tree knits. It is the plush fingering base. It's 100% superwash merino. I would have sworn this was MCN based on how it feels. It is beautiful. And this is the Awe gradient. I'm just going to hold it up here so you can really appreciate its beauty. The camera isn't really doing this justice. It's kind of losing some of the nuance, if you like, between the outside here and this kind of really beautiful sort of rich burgundy and eventually sort of real plummy interior. It's kind of, it's losing a little bit in camera translation, shall we say. In terms of yardage, this is great actually. It is 560 yards or 512 meters. So for all that it's a fingering weight, it's actually a little bit overweight as a skein, and it just means that this is going to be great for really making the most of this beautiful gradient. As I say, there were a few colorways here. You can see why my heart was stolen by, I mean, essentially it's this cubbyhole in a single skein. It's also most of this cubbyhole in a single, it's kind of my colours. I think let's just leave it at that. But yeah, really loved this yarn, and just got to squishing it. Knew that as soon as I squished it, it had to come home with me, so it got squished away in my suitcase with a handful of other things, including, you know, cereal and mini bagels and things that we were going to spend 2 weeks eating before coming home after 4 days. So yeah, bit of a random one, but definitely happy to bring this one home with me as a bit of a souvenir from my curtailed travels. Moving along into vicarious knitting, and it's fair to say that the inspiration has been flowing thick and fast over the last few weeks, whether you are casting on with wild abandon or indeed whether you're just taking stock and using this as an opportunity to perhaps go back and work through some whips. I do not have the self-control or indeed the discipline to be doing any of that. I think someone asked me about this on forget whether it was Instagram or potentially a YouTube comment about, oh, you know, are you tackling your whip pile? Nope. No, none of that. Why would I be doing that? No, look, I am a big old fan, as you've probably established, of being kind to yourself at all times. Knitting is not something I intend to give myself a particularly hard time over, let alone in the best of times. Right now there is all kinds of craziness going on out in the world, and in my own little haven where I'm able to do what I like when I like to the extent of my ability, I can damn well assure you that I'm going to be making the most of whatever I can do to really make myself feel pretty happy and comfortable. And right now that does not mean tackling my whip pile. Right now it means tackling and diving into this gloriousness for just complete and utter hedonism as far as I'm concerned. So yes, thank you. I appreciate that for some people that may be entirely up your street right now. For me, oh no, 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 no. I will be doing the wild abandoning. I promise you that. And with all of that inspiration, there are some incredible things that you've been working on that tallied in really nicely with some of the things that had already caught my eye. So I have taken a look through the Show Us Your Actual Knits thread and plucked out a few choice projects that really, really made my heart sing. The first of those is actually a pattern that I'd already posted about over on Instagram previously. Those of you who've been watching for a while will know my deep and unabashed love of patterns by Sari Nordland, and her Celeste pullover is absolutely no exception. I'll put her pattern pic up here on the side just for you to see and to love and to appreciate. It's almost as though she knows the key to my heart. It's a textured yoke and it's knit in gold. I mean, it's like I'm a typecast. Yeah, I know, it's sad but true. This is a beautiful pattern. It's her Celeste pullover. She was testing it for a while, and one of the people who completed a test knit on her behalf is one of our very own group members, who is Mariana57, and she completed this stunning grey Celeste pullover. I'll include her pattern picture, her project picture rather, up here on the screen just now for you all to appreciate. It is beautiful. Obviously it's stunning in gold, it's now beautiful in silver. I love this pattern so much. She's knit it so beautifully. It fits her perfectly. So congratulations on an amazing job with this pullover. In terms of the sweater itself, it is a worsted weight pullover, so it would be perfect for those of us still stuck in slightly chillier climes. It's definitely going to be an absolute staple, albeit it's got that nice kind of open lace front. In terms of sizing, it does pretty well. In terms of its inclusiveness, apologies, just checking my notes as I go, but it is everything from a 32 inch up to a 63.5 inch bust measurements. Now there is a couple of inches of ease in there depending on how you want the sweater to fit, but as such it does a pretty good job on the size inclusivity front as well. It's knit at a relatively tight gauge for worsted weight, so about 19 stitches over 4 inches, and using sort of fairly small needles, so 3.5 and 4 millimeters, which is a US size, I think 5 and 6 respectively. So you're going to get something that's going to be fairly dense, but again with that beautiful kind of lace yoke, it's going to be, oh, it's going to be so lovely. So yes, if you're in the market for one of those sweaters, I highly recommend you take a look at Celeste, and thank you so much to Mariana for showcasing it so wonderfully. Next up, we have another of my favourite designers over here at Knitting Vicariously. Rachel Ilsley is the designer behind the Unwind knitwear brand. She is the designer who, amongst other things, has written up the pattern for the Urban Jungle hat, which is that fantastic kind of leopard spot print hat pattern that I knit for Rhinebeck last year. She has a range of really beautiful patterns, one of which is blossoming. I'll include her pattern picture up here on the screen. It is again a stunning sweater. It's got this beautiful, quite delicate colourwork yoke, and it's knit in a lovely fingering weight yarn as well, so it's going to be a perfect shoulder season sweater. It's got those elbow length sleeves. It's just beautiful. And again, we're lucky enough to have had one of our group members knit this too. So Zanita Knits, I believe that's how you pronounce your name, apologies if I have butchered that entirely, has knit up a beautiful version of this in similar colours. So again, that kind of wonderful neutral and a slight kind of pale peachy pink over the top. It's just such a gorgeous combination and so very well executed. And I spotted that you knit it in cashmere, so it's got to be the softest thing imaginable. That's, it's already a gorgeous sweater, and now you're just adding that texture into the mix. It must be truly glorious. Again, Rachel is someone that does a really great job of supporting body diversity and sizing. So her smallest size is a 30-inch bust, and it goes all the way up to a 62-inch as well. It's designed to be knit with 0 to 3 inches of ease. So again, a really versatile sweater, both in terms of its sizing and in terms of the fit that you opt to go for. So if you are in the market for a nice shoulder season sweater, this could be the one for you. Thank you so much to Zanita Knits, and just amazing job on the sweater. Very, very much coveting that right now. Beautiful. There are so many incredible projects and knits in the Show Us Your Actual Knits thread. It's been incredibly difficult to narrow it down this time round, but the last one I wanted to showcase this week was also a new to me pattern, and this is the Walter sweater by Jose Pacon. This is a stunning worsted weight sweater with a huge amount of texture and some beautiful detailing down on the sleeves. The pattern picture is just up here for you to appreciate, and it is really gorgeous. It's knit seamlessly from the top down, and yeah, just everything you really want in a cozy sweater. I have to thank the fabulous Shelby Woo for bringing this to our attention. Again, she had worked up a version and posted about it in our thread, and her version, which I'll put up here on the screen just now, is truly stunning. This is one of those patterns that I think I'd appreciated it so much more after I saw her version than if I'd just seen the pattern picture alone, because that, again, the stunning yarn, and it is, full disclosure, one of my favourite yarn dyers who's dyed this yarn. This is Laura of Tiny Human Knits. It's her Merino DK in the Victoria colour, and it absolutely has my heart. It is the perfect, just again, springy peach colour, and yeah, for all that this is a worsted weight sweater, it absolutely looks like something you can and should be wearing to death during this spring season. Again, the sizing on this is pretty great. It goes from 33.75 inches up to 0.75 inches. That feels like a weird thing to say. 33.75 inches all the way up to a 64-inch bust. Again, there's a little bit of ease that's built in there, but depending on how you want it to fit, I would say size appropriately. So again, 3 great sweaters, 3 incredible examples of those sweaters, and again, just yet more freaking talent coming out the ears of the various folks that we have within our Ravelry group, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you that spends time in that space to make it just a wonderful place to be. To go back to the point I was making before, genuinely, if you are struggling at the moment, if you need a little bit of kind of light relief, or you want the chance to interact with some folk, I would highly recommend you head on over to our groups, have a look through some of the knit along sort of threads that we've had in the past, have a look through some of the current threads that we've got in there. We have an ongoing Show Us Your Actual Knits thread, as well as a monthly thread where you can talk about inspiration that you've seen that month, and yeah, just please do feel free to go on over there and engage and have a bit of a chat. So that is pretty much it for this episode. We're settling into what is a bit of a sort of new normal over here at the moment. So yeah, it's definitely, don't get me wrong, this is a weird fucking time, and I'm conscious that for many folks across the world it is deeply uncertain and frankly scary. I do hope you're all doing well. I hope you've got what you need to keep you safe, to keep you healthy, to keep you just sustained over the next few months, and yeah, fingers crossed that if you do know of anyone who is going through a fairly crappy time at the moment, that may be an understatement in the extreme, that you and your loved ones are safe and well and will continue to be so. For my part, I am, as I say, settling into a bit of a new normal here. There's a fair bit of knitting that's happening, there's a fair bit of conference call knitting that is happening, but otherwise I am pretty good. Thank you again to everyone for your concern, reaching out to us after and on the duration of the holiday itself. I really do appreciate it. I was a bit overwhelmed by the time I got back. I wasn't able to go and reply to everyone, so apologies if you sent me a note and I haven't responded to you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the folk that did reach out at that point in time. It was hugely just kind, generous of you, and certainly made a very stressful situation a little bit easier to bear. But as I say, we are starting to reach into a kind of new normal over here. I expect to be back on my regular bi-weekly podcasting schedule. As you may expect, my general sort of out and about in London vlogs, they're going to be a little bit thin in the ground over the next few months. I suspect you can probably understand why. But yes, so from me, I just want to say I wish you a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, mentally occupied, challenged, whatever it was that you need from that knitting right now. And whether you be knitting for real or knitting vicariously, I hope you keep on keeping on. I hope you stay safe, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye. So if I stand up here to show you this necklace, then it is clear that I am once again giving you a gratuitous boob shot. Oh, you can take the girl out the knitwear, but you can't. No, that sounds wrong. I'm not out of knit. I'm not. The girls aren't. Just forget I said anything. Right, let's start this bit again. Oh, good lord. Yes, indeed, I have completed a pair of socks. I will pop them up here on the screen. These are socks that I'm calling my exposed tits in isolations. Of course, that would be the very moment that just outside my window, my neighbour has wandered gently into view, and the windows, they are indeed open. So shouting the word exposed tits at a camera in my room, I am winning at life, winning at it, I tell you. Oh God. The main colourway that I've been using here again is the fabulous If I Want Exposure, I Will Get My Tits. Hello neighbours! Oh good lord, this is, if I go a bit kind of like sotto voce with some of this stuff, you're gonna know why. Yeah, there's nothing like sitting in isolation and talking about exposure of your tit. I just, This is giving rise to a very different set of concerns about, you know, what my neighbours really think that I'm up to at this point. Oh, I'm gonna have a reputation, but luckily I'm not able to go outside and find out what it is.